Hey guys. So, in the 20 years that I have been a practicing witch, I have never made a poppet. I've never done anything of that sort with a poppet or a doll or anything like that. Never done any poppet magic. And I recently thought to myself, why have I not done this? I think for the longest time, if I'm being perfectly honest, I actually, for some strange reason, wasn't comfortable with it. And I decided to explore that and thought, okay, there's no reason to be uncomfortable with doing this, first of all. I don't even know what made me so uncomfortable. And to be perfectly honest, I'm a very visual learner. So having a representation like this could really be beneficial for me when it comes to focusing my intention on something. So I decided to put needle to thread to say and make one for the first time. And I wanted to share with you all what I did and kind of take you through that journey and sort of explain my intentions for what I would like to use this poppet for and some ideas of what you could potentially use a poppet for. However, keep in mind that my journey starting with this type of magic is extremely new. I just really wanted to share it with you all. And also, another disclaimer, this is what worked for me. So please make your poppet however you wish. You can make it out of many different materials. I just tried to work with what I had on hand. And so let's get into what I did. So I had some felt left over from previous projects that I had done. And I really didn't want to spend any money because I'm in a tough financial situation. So I really wanted to see if I could make something out of what I had. Thankfully, I had everything I needed, which rarely works out that way. So I took some felt and I actually drew out, I folded the felt over and I drew out my poppet with just a white colored pencil, which I was attempting to reach and now can't. That's fine. um, then I cut it out with some fabric scissors and then I used some embroidery needles and I used some embroidery thread. Now, I have some experience working with felt and embroidery thread since I was a kid. So it was kind of what I was most comfortable doing. And I think it worked out pretty well. Don't mind my stitching, honestly, like this is not something that I'm well versed at, but it's a little crude looking. It's fine. So, as soon as I had cut it out and started stitching it up. I stitched it up all the way to basically the waist. And then I found I didn't have any cotton balls or anything like that to stuff it with, but I did have some old pantyhose. So I figured that'll work. So I decided to cut them up into strips and I went about stuffing them in the strips in little bit by little bit while intermixing with some crystals and some herbs that I chose. So I'm going to go through those a little bit first and what I personally chose to use in it. And this is really kind of all more focused on my intention for the poppet. I don't have, you can include your own hair or fingernails, and I honestly didn't do that just because I don't intend on using this poppet just for myself. I kind of want to use it for an all purpose sort of thing. Healing or protection mostly is my intention for this thing. I intend on using it a lot for my chronic pain, but also for any pain that anyone else is experiencing and protection or binding as well. It just depends. But I felt black was a really good choice. I went with purple for the thread just because purple is a very witchy, empowering color to me. It makes me feel mystical and magical. So those were my reasons behind my choices for that. And I also went with a darker red for the heart. Um, so as for my picks for cat hair on the label. For what I put inside of it, I first of all I put a rose quartz, I put a smoky quartz, and I put a tiger's eye inside. And those are mostly for protection and healing and love. Then I went with lavender. I wanted there to be a lot of lavender in it just because I plan on using this a lot for healing. So I figured lavender is, to me has always been a very, very calming, healing herb. And I have a surplus of it at the moment. So Next, I chose some calendula, and this is mostly just for that ancestral connection. To me, calendula or marigold flowers are very, they, I use them as offerings for my ancestors. I use them as an offering for Santa Muerte. I personally just find these flowers to be very connected to ancestral veneration. So I felt that if I wanted to have some healing or protection and I wanted to tie in my ancestral worship, this would be the best way to do it. This next one is a little making of my own that was inspired by a book, which I will grab in just a second. But this is called Witch's Salt. Don't mind my handwriting. So I actually got this idea. My desk is only so big, guys. I'm sorry. I got this recipe from this fantastic book of Blood and Bones. This is one of my favorite books on witchcraft. I love this book so much. I digested it completely last summer. Um, in here, she has a recipe for witch's salt, and I'm actually just going to take this off camera and read it really quick because I'm nearsighted. I'm sorry, guys. Witch's salt has basically two purposes: protection and cursing. Here is a basic recipe that can be tweaked to suit your needs. So you primarily use sea salt as the base, and then a handful of ritual fire ashes. I happen to have salt that I had been burning in or using as a base for my cauldron for my incense and stuff, so it was already mixed in with ritual fire essentially. And then I chose to add whatever herbs I deemed fit. That's just me and how I personally wanted it. I have buckthorn. I know I have buckthorn. I have lavender in there. I have cedar. I believe that's all I have, if I'm not mistaken. But I know it was mostly to use for protection. I actually sprinkle this around in the windowsills in my house and stuff. It also has hair from each of my family members, including my pets. So this I really liked the idea of this when I was reading through Of Blood and Bones, and it's kind of become a staple in my practice, I should say. So I really wanted to include some in my poppet here. The next I used was rosemary for protection, and then some cedar bark from a good friend of mine. And I'm very, very connected to cedar trees. I grew up in Washington State, so they are just a very sacred tree to me. And to me, they are my go-to herb for cleansing. I don't prefer sage. I don't like the smell of it. And honestly, I've heard some controversial stuff about it, so I just decided to go with cedar because it's what works for me. So, sort of intermixed pantyhose stuffing in there with each of these herbs and kind of slowly built my way up and continued to sew until I got to about here, and then I finished it up. But I'm really looking forward to having this visual representation. There's already cat hair on it. And exploring a little bit with this. My intention with this is that I really want to experiment with self-love as well as healing spells for others, as well as binding spells if I need to. And from my understanding, what you do with that generally is if you're using these for someone else and you didn't include any of their, what they call a tether, you can get some of their handwriting or a picture of them or something. You can even use tarot cards if you're thinking about doing some sort of intention with a tarot card. You can put that on your poppet. The other thing that really struck me was Kellyanne Maddox had mentioned in one of her videos where she talks about poppets that you can use pins and take pins and write an intention on the pin and put it on a specific part of the body. So I really struggle with chronic pelvic pain. So maybe I want to write the word healing, and then I put the pin right here on the pelvis with the word healing. I loved that idea. I felt that that really resonated with me for the struggles that I have with a lot of chronic pain and stuff. So this was something that I really wanted to experiment with a little bit more. And I'm looking forward to it. I actually think it's pretty cute, despite me, not so graceful stitching. The other thing I want to quick mention before I end the video is that whenever I do something like this, whenever I do a working or a spell and I kind of tweak it to my own because that's just what I do. That's me. Um, I really like to make sure that I write it all down in my book of mirrors. And it's usually just oftentimes, for instance, like the poppet, it'll just be a list of the ingredients I used with the intention that I personally had in my head for why I had them in there. Or this is my go-to for, I mean, this is my book of mirrors. It's my spiritual brain dump, so it's got everything in here. Me experimenting with vine runes. Okay, here are my devotional candles for my deities. This is another example of me just listing everything I used and why, essentially. Enough for me to understand. Um, and then if I'm planning out a spell, I'll do the same thing. But that's something that I would really recommend whenever you do a working like this so that you can refer back to it. For instance, if I wanted to make another poppet, I could look at this and kind of be like, okay, so that's what I used in the last one. Or my devotional candles. This is the one that I have for hell. Nothing super, super special, but I included herbs and oils in there. And now I'm going to remember if I burn, when I burn through this, what I used and if I maybe want to experiment with something else or just go with what works. But that's another tip that I recommend. If that is how your brain works, that's how my brain works. I need to write things down. I used to be more clear headed and then I had children. So, um, anyway, I hope you guys really enjoyed my little fun Poppet video here. I will probably make another video a few months down the road of how this went and kind of how I'm liking experimenting with Poppet Magic. But I'm really, really grateful that I finally just kind of ironed out why haven't I tried this? It's been 20 years since I started on this path, and this is something that I haven't started working with. I think it's time. So, that is my little puppet for you. Thank you for watching, guys, and as always, blessed be.